Hi everyone, welcome to Mangata Monday. Today we talk about algorithmic buy and burn. And we have a very special guest today, which is Peter Chris, co-founder of Mangata, providing all the direction. Hi Peter.
Hi Tommy, it's great to be here once again after a few weeks. So I really like, Tommy, that you've opened up the algorithmic buy and burn topic. Do you have any questions?
Yes. So my first question is, what is algorithmic buy and burn?
Well, it's a mechanism of how you can make token price being appreciated over time, and it's being done on the blockchain. So there is a problem that all the tokens have, or most of the tokens have in crypto, and that is, how is the token price technically tied to a success of the protocol? So for instance, if you have Atom token on Cosmos, it's a long discussion that the Atom token has no utility and has no way how the price should reflect the success of the Cosmos ecosystem. When you go to Polkadot, you have DOT. And the question, like, how DOT appreciates with the success of the ecosystem. For instance, there is one mechanism that you need to take the DOT and lock it into a slot if you want to buy a slot for your parachain. And in that way, that's a locking and kind of deflationary mechanism for the DOT price to be appreciated, because the DOT will be more scarce when it is more used. And in terms of like decentralized exchange, so you have a decentralized exchange, you have a token that should be somewhat reflecting the success of the exchange, and like how to do it, how technically connect the success with the success of the exchange. So we asked ourselves a question that what is the biggest single most important attribute of decentralized exchange that would mean that the exchange is successful? And there is a very straightforward answer, and that is volume. So that means the more volume is traded on an exchange, you can be sure that the exchange is getting more successful, right? I wouldn't like to measure it with liquidity, because liquidity can be idle. Liquidity can just sit there and be not used. But the volume, the trades, number of trades, and the volume that is happening on an exchange, that is a proof that exchange is being used and it's successful. More token pairs are listed on an exchange, bigger liquidity, that will result with the volume. So buy and burn, it's a mechanism where you take a small part, the fee that you pay if you do a trade. In our case, it will be 0.025%, I believe, or 0.05. Tommy, please correct me if I'm wrong. But let's say a small part of that fee is going to be automatically used on the blockchain to buy the native token and then burning that portion. And this is happening completely autonomously. It's completely algorithmic. And in this way, you have this very nice thing on the blockchain that when the blockchain is getting more used, when it's successful over time, imagine there will be 1,000 token pairs listed and they will be traded left to right, it will be an automatic demand for the token. And this is basically algorithmic buy and burn.
Okay, that's quite a lot. And I see that when you have first told me about the concept, it took quite some time for me to get all of the details, to internalize all of the details, because you're actually already quite a few steps ahead of the average DeFi user who might just have understood the concepts of TVL and volume maybe, and this seems like already a few steps ahead where you're looking at, okay, there is the success of the DEX and the success of the token, but it's not necessarily bound together because one can appreciate while the other does not. So maybe to unpack all of this, let's go through the slides now. and unpack it step by step, and it will reflect a lot of the things that you just mentioned.
Let's do it.
Okay, so let's start by a definition so that we have the outer framing and then we can move inside. Algorithmic buy and burn is a novel mechanism. That means that it's there is some novelty that we added to it that enables a crypto project to maintain a capped supply. So we are still having a capped supply, while at the same time continuously minting new rewards for liquidity provision and block creation. So we have a capped supply and we mint new rewards. And as a bonus, we positively connect the success of the activity of the network with the token price appreciation. Okay, that's the outer definition. And the first question is, why do you need such a thing? And maybe to give a little bit of how we usually do things internally. So Peter, Gleb, and the team have developed a lot of features and innovations for the project. And then Peter comes to me and tells me, Tommy, write an article about proof of liquidity or about algorithmic buy and burn. And so I have to do some research and I have to talk with the team and ask them everything that they have developed and why do they do it and what's the story behind this. And while I did my research, I discovered that we are actually solving a certain dilemma. So usually when you do tokenomics, when you create a new ecosystem like Magata X, you're basically trying to solve economic problems. You're also solving technical problems and so on, but on some level you're solving economical problems. And the thing that Peter, you and the team solves is actually what I called a supply dilemma. And so I will be going through two dilemmas, the incentive dilemma and the supply dilemma, and then maybe Peter, you think, is it valid, or maybe you look differently at it. Okay, so the incentive dilemma is actually something that was solved in the DeFi summer of 2020. And so what is the dilemma? The dilemma is that liquidity providers want to earn as many fees and incentives as possible. So liquidity providers, of course, want to earn. But on the other hand, traders want to pay as little as possible. And so you have a party and a counterparty. And of course, both of them want to have the best deal. And the common ground that was found, or the middle ground that was found, is that it was agreed somehow by consensus over the whole blockchain world that 0.3% exchange commission is acceptable. So most DEXs use this value as a standard for uncorrelated assets. So for example, ETH versus KSM or MGX KSM or something like that. That would be 0.3% exchange commission. But the issue is it is not attractive enough for most liquidity providers. So up until 2020, the concept of a DEX was there, but it wasn't too attractive for liquidity providers because they were oftentimes losing out on that deal. They were basically giving value to the traders until a solution was found, and that was liquidity mining. So you have incentives for liquidity providers and for traders, and the dilemma is that they are opposing forces, and the solution was to create liquidity mining rewards. But they introduced a new problem. They introduced high inflation and sometimes even unbounded inflation, meaning that a protocol gave out tokens as liquidity mining rewards, but basically these were promises of the future value of the protocol. And so the problem was actually for some DEXs just moved into the future. But Peter, I guess you were there, so you might know a part of the story that I missed here, or how do you look at it?
Well, I think you caught the exact things, like how the incentive dilemma has been solved. Maybe I will just add more historical fact that the liquidity mining was popularized mostly with the compound finance protocol because they've introduced liquidity mining rewards. And after them, it was copied heavily, where there has been dozens, hundreds of new protocols that has been introducing different liquidity mining rewards. And it is working until these days.
Okay. So then I would move on and focus on this new problem that was here introduced, the high inflation, the high or even unbounded inflation. And this, let's now move on and talk about the supply dilemma. And this is here, I claim it's solved for Mangata. So what is the dilemma? We are having unbounded inflation, and this leads to token devaluation. You can see this with a lot of DEX projects right now. They have a lot of inflation, they're giving out a lot of rewards, and it actually leads to a high degree of token devaluation for many projects. And this is the one side here. On the other side, you have investors who want their assets there, so the DEX tokens to appreciate. And so, or to at least have some kind of stability or predictability. And there are different ways in how decentralized exchanges cope with the problem or deal with the problem. So let's say a conservative solution would be to start with big rewards and then over time reduce rewards. You could say to promise to solve the problem later. And some DEXs just give up on the hard cap and just say, okay, we have unbound inflation and it just stays that way. But at Mangata, we think that it could be solved in a different way. And so our solution is to keep a hard cap and continually burn tokens, which essentially creates space for new rewards. So Peter, in your introduction, you have been focusing a lot on the economic side of the investors. In my introduction, I focus more on the economic side of the network itself. But I guess it's two parts of the same coin. It's two sides of the same coin. So the focus here is we have keep a hard cap and still have infinite rewards. And we do this by introducing algorithmic buy burn. So how does it work? There are a few DEXs, a few protocols who already have or participate in a manual buyback and burn. So for example, you might be aware that the Binance chain, they take parts of their revenue, of the quarterly revenue, and they buy BNB tokens and burn them. But this is still somewhat of a manual process. And we think it can be done better. So Mangata X burns MGX tokens with every single trade. And it's called algorithmic buy and burn because there is no manual intervention needed. It happens every time with every single trade. It's part of the code of the liquidity pool.
Tommy, can I add one more thing here?
Mm-hmm.
Why was the reasoning behind algorithmic and why it's not a normal buy and burn, but why it's algorithmic? It means we wanted to create an autonomous mechanism for buying and burning, and the amount of how much it should be bought and burned will be determined by the community governance. So the price appreciation of the token is not dependent on some centralized developer team. It's not dependent on any, even if multiple teams would be working on the protocol from the development perspective. The token success is not dependent on them, purely dependent on the community, how much they decide that how much fees should be allocated to the buy and burn mechanism on the blockchain. And in this way, you can say that the more decentralized trading is happening on the blockchain, the more successful the token will be. And that's what we want. We want to tie the success of a token with the amount of decentralization. And that's why we love this mechanism.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So what you're saying is it connects, it it makes it somewhat automatic. It removes the pressure from the team. It basically delegates the issue to the network itself.
Exactly.
Okay. So there's already a question in chat. I think it will be answered with the next bullet point. So how does it work? It is part of the exchange commission. So the way we have set it up is that 0.2% of the exchange commission go to liquidity providers. So 0.2% of the trade volume go to liquidity providers. It's volume that is added to the pool. 0.05% go to the treasury, and 0.05% are used for algorithmic buy and burn. So to give an example, let's say $1 million of volume is traded on Magata X. It means that $2,000 of value go to the liquidity providers, $500 of value go to the treasury, and $500 of value are used to buy MGX on the market and immediately burn it. So this answers also a question that we have in chat. So there is a determined rate which liquidity providers get, and it's 0.2%. 0.05% to the treasury, 0.05% to algorithmic buy and burn. But as a side effect, if you are a participant in an MGX-based liquidity pool, the burning acts, because it creates price appreciation, it acts a little bit if you do the calculation from a liquidity provider that is in an MGX pool, like you have, not exactly, but very similar to if you have 0.25% of the exchange commission that you get. Okay, what are the positive effects of the system for the network? It removes tokens from circulation and allows new incentives for creators and liquidity providers to be minted. And it gives more control options to governance. This is what you just mentioned, Peter. So it is another variable that can be controlled by governance. The values that we just introduced are the initial values with which the network will launch, but of course governance can change them if they determine that there are values that should better be used. Okay, for token holders, it creates demand for MGX. And it adds deflationary pressure. So it ensures that MGX holders are rewarded by trading activity in the whole system. So not only in a liquidity pool where they are participating, but no matter which liquidity pool is active, MGX is bought and burned, and it ensures that MGX holders are rewarded. And there is also benefit for the team. It removes the need to intervene in the ecosystem. You can see this in a lot of projects that the community requests the team to do something to help the token price appreciate. And with algorithmic buy and burn, the control is actually giving to the network and to the stakeholders of the ecosystem to put it in their own hands. So it removes the need for the team to intervene, and it makes them free to focus on developing, focus on engineering, focus on continually delivering new value to the system. So the success of the token, as Peter mentioned, is not dependent on the team, but on the usage of the platform itself. And it could even create enough deflationary pressure to balance the creation of new tokens. But of course, it depends on the price of MGX itself. Okay, to give you a little bit of an example, we created projections, we created a simulation, but of course it is hard because there are so many moving parts, there are so many variables that could be different, so we needed to make a few decisions. If you are interested to discuss this further, you can of course reach out and we can discuss it in more detail or even create different simulations, because I've created a small program to do the simulation, and so we can also extend this or do other simulations. But these are the parameters we have chosen to give a good example. So we are simulating algorithmic buy and burn, and we are comparing it with 4 DEXs with basically different parameters on how they are taking in exchange commission. So we have the Mangata X model with 0.2% liquidity provider fees, 0.05% to the treasury, 0.05% to algorithmic buy and burn. We say there is a model with just liquidity provider fees, which is basically the Uniswap model. We have fees and treasury models, so 0.2% of the liquidity provider go to liquidity providers, and 0.1% goes to a treasury. And then we have a model of fees plus buy and burn. So 0.2% go to liquidity providers and 0.1% goes to algorithmic buy and burn. Okay, so so now a few other parameters. If you go deeper into the topic, they are important. If they're not too important to you, with the next slide, you will see the actual resolution. We have picked a total value locked of $250 million US. That is in today's terms a top 30 DEX. We assume a yearly volume of $8 billion. And we assume that from the total MGX liquidity, from the total MGX supply, 30% of MGX tokens are in liquidity, and that the MGX dominance, so how much of the liquidity on the DEX is MGX, is also 30%. This is comparable to other DEXs that have similar targets as we do. And so we assume that of this 30% pool MGX dominance, we assume that this is a single pool to make things easy. So it's 150 million in TVL and $4.8 billion in volume. Okay. And then we simulate 100,000 front and back swaps in a year. And so we assume that we have AUSD and we front and back swap it to MGX and back. So that's I think $24,000 per transaction that we are simulating. Okay, let's compare how this looks like. So we're having the simulation here, and I'm making it a little bit bigger. Okay, so these are the fees that I just mentioned here, and we have the models of Mangata X, just liquidity pools fees, fees plus treasury, and fees plus algorithmic buy and burn. Okay, and then the variables that I just mentioned, they are the same for all projects. And what we do now is that we look at how does the liquidity pool look like ahead of the run. Please keep in mind that these are simulated numbers. So this would be the values assuming the numbers are above or true. So if we would be a top 30 DEX with the numbers above, then this would result in a valuation of 18 cents. But please know we are not there, but we are aiming to go there. And then you have the results after the run. So after 100,000 swaps from USDC, I guess it was USDC back then, but let's assume it is AUSD. It's basically the same. Let's say we go from AUSD to MGX and from MGX back. How would it have played out differently? And here you see the results that we are looking at. So maybe view freeze, let's freeze the first row. Okay, and here you have the different results now. And what you're seeing is, I know it's a lot of numbers, but we focus on the bold numbers. So what you see here is that MGX represents basically a good middle ground for a lot of different models. So let's just compare it to the just liquidity provider fees. What you see here is that liquidity providers, so let me take a look. Okay, so the pool value itself would have grown a little bit more. So liquidity providers would have earned a little bit more in this model. But you would have no money in the treasury and you would have no MGX burned. No money in the treasury means there is no possibility for the protocol to invest in new development, to invest in innovation. So while liquidity providers would earn a little bit more, the protocol itself would be missing out and it would just have to hope that nothing in the world changes. But the world keeps changing, so we need to invest in innovation and new development and engineering and operations and so on. Okay, Let's compare it to the fees plus treasury model. What you see here is that there are liquidity provider fees, but there is a little bit going into the treasury, but no burn is happening. And what you see is that the token appreciates better if you have a little bit of buy and burn, and even liquidity providers themselves would get more money if you have a little bit of buy and burn. So we are exchanging here that there is going more into the treasury. And when we add buy and burn, you see that the price appreciates more, which helps token holders, which helps liquidity providers. And so it eventually helps everyone who participates in the ecosystem. But the treasury would be losing out a little bit. And our final model here, fees plus buy and burn. What do we see here? If we have more buy and burn, it appreciates the token more. It also helps the liquidity providers a little bit more, but there is nothing in the treasury. And so there is no way for the treasury to invest in new innovations and so on. So basically, if you combine all the results, it just tells you one thing. There are 3 stakeholders which are profiting from these models. 3 stakeholders who are profiting from these models. And who are the stakeholders? It is the ones that are part of the tokenomics here. So it is liquidity providers, the treasury, and algorithmic buy and burn. So in summary, the values here give governance the possibility to say how much should go to liquidity providers, how much should go to the treasury, how much should go to algorithmic buy and burn, and basically gives governance control to adapt to the market situation, and basically introduces just one new variable that says how much should MGX holders themselves profit from economic activity on the ecosystem. Yeah. So that was the projection. And so let me summarize everything for you, and then we might go into a Q&A if there are any questions. So what did we just see? We see that the Mangata X model shows a better price performance than the just liquidity provider fees model and the fees plus treasury model. So buy and burn increases price performance. And at the same time, it does not sacrifice the treasury intake like the fees plus buy and burn model does, where no treasury intake is guaranteed. Yeah? And of course you need that. So it is the best combination of rewarding liquidity providers, treasury intake, and rewarding token holders. And of course it can adapt to the market situation. So it gives governance control to change these factors, which results in one of our most prominent mottos, which is hard-capped infinite rewards.